Currently, Earth. On August 9th in 378 AD, in one of the most decisive battles in history, a large Roman army under Valens, the Roman emperor of the East, is defeated by the Visigoths at the Battle of Adrianople in present-day Turkey. Two-thirds of the Roman army, including Emperor Valens himself, were overrun and slaughtered by the mounted barbarians. Crowned in 364 AD, Emperor Valens initiated warfare against the semi-civilized Visigoths in 364, and by 369 had defeated them. Visigoths under Fritigern were given permission to settle south of the Danube in the Roman Empire, but subjected to oppressive measures by Roman officials. They soon rose in revolt. In 378, Valens marched a Roman army against Fritigern, and 10 miles from Adrianople, the Romans came upon the massed barbarians. As the Visigoth cavalry was off on a foraging mission, Valens ordered a hasty attack on August 9th. The Romans initially drove the barbarians back, but then the Visigoth cavalry suddenly returned, routing the Romans and forcing them into retreat. The horsemen then rode down and slaughtered the fleeing Roman infantry. Some 20 of 30,000 men continued their eternity, including Emperor Valens. The decisive Visigoth victory at the Battle of Adrianople left the Eastern Roman Empire nearly defenseless and established the supremacy of cavalry over infantry that would last for the next millennium. Emperor Valens was succeeded by Theodosius the Great, who struggled to repel the hordes of Visigoth barbarians plundering the Balkan Peninsula. On August 9th in 1877, having refused government demands that they move to a reservation, a small band of Nez Perce tribesmen clashed with the U.S. Army near Big Hole River in Montana. The conflict between the U.S. government and the Nez Perce was one of the most tragic of the many Indian wars of the 19th century, beginning with the tribe's first contact with the explorers Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. The peaceful Nez Perce had befriended and cooperated with the Americans. Even when hordes of white settlers began to flood into their homelands along the Snake River around the present-day intersection of the Oregon, Washington, and Idaho state borders, most of the Nez Perce peacefully moved to a reservation. However, about a quarter of the Nez Perce, most of them stockmen and buffalo hunters, refused to accept internment on a reservation. Government pressure to force these last resistors to comply finally led to the outbreak of the Nez Perce War of 1877. A small band of warriors, never more than 145 men, though burdened with about 500 non-combatants, fought U.S. soldiers at 4 major battles. The third battle of the Nez Perce War occurred on this day in 1877. Fleeing eastward with hopes of escaping to Canada, the Nez Perce made camp in the Big Hole Basin in present-day western Montana. At 3:30 a.m., Colonel John Gibbon attacked the sleeping Indians with a force of 183 men. Raking the Indian lodges with withering rifle fire, the soldiers initially seemed to be victorious. The Nez Perce, however, soon counterattacked from concealed positions in the surrounding hills. After 4 days of sporadic fighting, the Nez Perce withdrew. Of the soldiers, 29 men continued their eternity with 40 men wounded. Of the Nez Perce, 89 people continued their eternity, mostly women and children. The battle dealt the Nez Perce a grave, though not fatal, blow. The remaining Nez Perce were able to escape, and they headed northeast towards Canada. Two months later, on October 5th, Colonel Nelson Miles decisively defeated the Nez Perce at the Battle of the Bear Paw Mountains. Those who did not continue their eternity surrendered and reluctantly agreed to return to the reservation. The Nez Perce were only 40 miles short of the Canadian border. On August 9th in 1974, in accordance with his statement of resignation the previous evening, Richard M. Nixon officially ends his term as the 37th president of our nation. Before departing with his family in a helicopter from the White House lawn, he smiled farewell and enigmatically raised his arms in a victory or peace salute. The helicopter door was then closed, and the Nixon family began their journey home to San Clemente, California. Richard Nixon was the first U.S. president to resign from office. Minutes later, then Vice President Gerald R. Ford was sworn in as the 38th president of our country in the East Room of the White House. After taking the oath of office, President Ford spoke to the nation in a television address declaring, quote, "My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over, unquote. Ford, the first president who came to the office through appointment rather than election, had replaced Spiro T. Agnew as vice president only 8 months before. In a political scandal independent of the Nixon administration's wrongdoings in the Watergate affair, Agnew had been forced to resign in disgrace after he was charged with income tax evasion and political corruption. In September of 1974, then President Gerald Ford pardoned former President Richard Nixon for any crimes he may have committed while in office, explaining that he wanted to end the national divisions created by the Watergate scandal.